He's watching me. Please don't react. She slid the napkin across the table with trembling fingers. A 19-year-old girl who looked like she hadn't slept in weeks, hadn't eaten in days, and hadn't been safe in 8 months. Outside the window, a black SUV sat with its engine running, waiting. And nobody in that diner yet understood that the next few hours would change every single one of their lives forever. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The bell above the door barely made a sound when she walked in. That was the first thing Maggie Dawson noticed. Most people who pushed open the door of Maggie's Route 9 cafe let it swing wide, letting in a gust of cold Texas air along with the noise of the highway. Truckers let it bang. Families let the kids run through first. Regulars didn't even think about it. But this girl, this pale, hollow-eyed girl in the oversized gray hoodie, she eased the door open like she was afraid of making any sound at all, like she had spent a long time learning that being noticed was dangerous. Maggie was wiping down the counter when she looked up. Her hand stopped moving. 23 years she had run this cafe. She had seen road-weary travelers, broken-down families, runaway teenagers, men crying into their coffee at 2 in the afternoon. She thought she had seen everything a small roadside diner could collect from the edges of American life. But something about this girl made the hair on the back of her arms stand straight up. The girl didn't look around the way most people do when they walk into a new place. She didn't scan the menu on the wall or squint at the chalkboard specials. Her eyes went immediately to the farthest booth, the one tucked against the window in the back corner, half hidden by the old jukebox nobody had fixed in 6 years. She walked straight to it, slid in with her back against the wall, and this was the thing that hit Maggie hardest, she turned her face just slightly toward the window and went perfectly, completely still, like prey that had learned to disappear in plain sight. Maggie set down her rag. She picked up a coffee pot and a menu and walked over slowly the way you approach something fragile. "Afternoon, honey," she said, keeping her voice low and easy. "Coffee to start." The girl's eyes snapped to her. Up close, Maggie could see the full picture of her cheeks, so pale they were nearly gray, lips cracked, and peeling dark circles carved deep under eyes that were a startling shade of blue. Her hands resting flat on the table had a faint but visible tremor. Not from cold, from something deeper. Something that had been going on for a long, long time. "Yes, please," the girl whispered. Maggie poured the coffee. "Set the menu down." "You take your time, sweetheart. No rush here." The girl nodded. She wrapped both hands around the mug the way a drowning person grabs a rope, and Maggie stood there for one more second because she couldn't make herself walk away. Not yet. "You doing all right?" The girl's jaw tightened. Her eyes cut to the window, and then back to Maggie. "I'm fine," she said. Flat, automatic. The voice of someone who had given that answer so many times it had lost all meaning. Maggie walked back to the counter. She didn't believe her for a single second. For the next 5 minutes, the girl didn't touch the menu. She sat with her hands wrapped around that coffee mug, and every 30 seconds or so, her eyes would drift to the window. Maggie watched her from behind the counter without being obvious about it. She had a gift for watching people without them knowing. 40 years of waitressing will do that to you. The black SUV was parked directly across the highway. Maggie had noticed it when she'd gone to the door to flip the open sign earlier. She hadn't thought anything of it then. Now she couldn't stop thinking about it. The engine was running. She could see the faint shimmer of exhaust in the cold air. Nobody had gotten out. Nobody had driven away. It was just sitting there, watching. When Maggie went back over with the coffee pot to refill, the girl had barely taken 2 sips. She leaned in slightly and said very quietly, "You decide what you want yet?" The girl looked up. Her blue eyes were filled with something that Maggie recognized after a long moment as calculation. She was deciding something, deciding whether to trust, whether to risk it. Then she reached into the front pocket of her hoodie and pulled out a small square of paper. Not paper, a napkin. A diner napkin, the cheap kind, already folded and refolded so many times the creases were soft. She unfolded it carefully with those trembling hands, smoothed it flat on the table, and pushed it across to Maggie. The handwriting was small, cramped, slightly uneven, like it had been written in a moving vehicle or in a hurry, or both. "He's watching me. Please don't react." Maggie read it twice. Her heart slammed once hard against her ribs. She did not react. That was the most difficult thing she had ever done in her entire life, standing in her own diner, reading those 7 words on a napkin and keeping her face as calm and pleasant as if the girl had just asked for the blueberry pie. How about some eggs and toast, Maggie said. Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that. We've got bacon sausage hash browns. You look like you could use something warm. The girl swallowed hard. I, I don't have any money. Don't worry about that, Maggie said. Simple, direct, non-negotiable. The girl's face did something then that made Maggie have to look away for a second to collect herself. It crumpled just for a split second, like a wall that had been holding back a flood and suddenly developed a crack. Just one crack, but it was enough to see what was behind it. Thank you, the girl breathed. Maggie tucked the order pad back in her apron. I'll get that started for you. You just sit tight. She walked back to the kitchen, passed through, leaned through, and said to her cook, Earl, full breakfast plate, everything. And don't rush it. Keep it hot. Earl raised an eyebrow. She ordered that. I ordered it, Maggie said, and her tone made it clear that was the end of the conversation. Then she picked up her phone from the shelf under the counter, considered it for a long moment, and set it back down. Not yet. She didn't know enough yet. So, the food came out in 12 minutes. Maggie set the plate down in front of the girl. Eggs, scrambled soft toast, golden brown bacon, and sausage. Both hash browns, crispy on the outside the way Earl always made them when he wasn't being rushed, and she watched the girl look at it. She didn't reach for the fork right away. She just looked at the food with an expression that Maggie couldn't entirely name. It was somewhere between disbelief and grief. Like the sight of something good and ordinary and warm had somehow made things more painful rather than less. Go ahead, Maggie said gently. It's yours. The girl picked up the fork. The first bite was tentative, careful, and then something shifted. Maggie stepped away to give her privacy because a person eating after days without food deserves that. They deserve to not be watched like a spectacle. But she kept the girl in her peripheral vision the entire time. And she kept her eye on that SUV across the street. It still hadn't moved. It was another 20 minutes before the girl spoke again. The plate was mostly cleared, not entirely because her stomach probably couldn't handle too much too fast and she was back to holding the coffee mug. But her color was slightly better. The trembling in her hands had lessened just a little. Maggie came by with the pot again. The girl looked up. My name is Emily, she said, barely above a whisper. Maggie said. She refilled the cup and stayed standing there. Emily's eyes went to the window, came back, went again. Like she was doing a calculation she kept having to restart. He won't come in here, she said more to herself than to Maggie. There are too many people. He doesn't like witnesses. A pause. Not during the day anyway. Maggie sat down across from her, just slid right into the other side of the booth, quiet and deliberate. Emily blinked, surprised by the closeness, but she didn't pull back. Who is he, Maggie asked. Emily's hands tightened around the mug. His name is Victor. Victor Kane. She said the name the way you might say the name of a disease, flat, medical, like she had removed herself from it emotionally just to survive saying it out loud. I've been with him for 8 months. Maggie waited. She had learned in decades of this work that the most powerful thing you can do for a person who needs to talk is to not fill the silence. Emily's jaw worked for a moment. Not by choice. The words came out rough. I was at a party. I was stupid. I was stupid and I was 18 and I didn't know. She stopped, drew a breath. It doesn't matter. What matters is I got out this morning. He sent me out alone, which he almost never does, and I ran. I just ran. That wasn't stupid, Maggie said firmly. That was brave. Emily shook her head. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't letting herself cry, not yet. You don't understand. I can't just call the police. Some of them, she lowered her voice even further, even though the nearest other customers were a retired couple, 3 booths away, and entirely absorbed in their own conversation. Some of them work for him. I don't know which ones. I don't know who to trust. Maggie felt something cold settle in her chest. Okay, she said slowly. Okay, what about family? Someone you can call. Emily's face changed completely, cracked open. My sister, she said, and now the tears did come silently one at a time, tracking down those pale cheeks. Lily, she's 15. Her voice broke. She pressed her lips together hard and fought it back. She's still there. She's still at the farmhouse. I didn't have time. I couldn't get to her, and now she stopped talking, put one hand over her mouth. Maggie reached across the table and covered the girl's other hand with both of hers. She didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. She just held on. The bell above the door rang, not softly this time. The door swung open hard, riding on a wall of cold air, an engine and noise, and 6 men walked in like they owned the ground beneath them. Heavy boots, every one of them. Leather jackets with patches and road miles stitched into every seam. Big men, not just in size, but in presence, the kind of men who take up more space than their bodies actually occupy. 3 of them were laughing about something. One was arguing loudly with another about directions. The last 2 were just talking in low rumbles. Half the diner looked up. A few people looked nervous, not because anything bad was happening, but because the arrival of 6 bikers anywhere tends to change the atmosphere of a room, the way a weather system changes the atmosphere of a county. The man leading them, and there was no question which one was leading, even though he wasn't doing anything overtly commanding, was enormous. 6'4" at least, with shoulders like a door frame, and a silver beard that had been growing since approximately the Nixon administration. He wore a jacket with a Vietnam veteran's patch on the left chest and what looked like 20 years of highway on the right sleeve. His hair was silver too, pulled back, and his eyes were gray, a pale, clear gray that picked up the light in the room the way certain stones do. He stopped just inside the door. He was scanning the room the way that man had probably scanned every room he'd entered for 50 years, a habit laid down in jungles and never fully unlearned. Taking inventory, cataloging, filing. His gaze found Maggie. She wasn't sure what her face was doing. She tried to keep it neutral, but 23 years of reading people didn't just work in one direction, and this man had clearly spent 50 years doing the same thing. He looked at Maggie. He looked at Emily in the corner booth just for a fraction of a second, taking in the pale face and the hunched shoulders and the way she was trying to be invisible. He looked back out the window at the SUV. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. He walked his group to the large round table in the center of the room, the one Maggie always kept cleared for bigger parties, and they settled in with the chaos and noise that comes naturally to a group of large men who have been on bikes for 3 hours. Jackets off, menu handed around, arguments about what to order, but the big man, he sat with his chair angled slightly toward the window, and he didn't pick up a menu. His name was Jack Callahan. Most people in this part of Texas knew him as Bear, which was what the patch on his jacket said and what practically everyone called him. He'd grown up in this county, gone to Vietnam at 19, come back at 21, to a country that wasn't sure it wanted him back. He'd spent the next 20 years doing hard things in hard places, some of it the kind of work he could talk about, most of it the kind he couldn't. Now he was 68 years old, widowed, semi-retired from running a motorcycle repair shop in town, and one of the most quietly respected men in a 3-county radius. He was also one of the most quietly dangerous. He didn't move from his chair. He didn't approach the girl. He did absolutely nothing that would cause the driver of that SUV to take notice. But his attention was entirely, completely focused on the booth in the back corner and on the window and on the vehicle sitting across the highway with its engine running. One of his crew, a thick-armed man named Dale, who had known Bear for 30 years, leaned over and muttered, "What are you looking at?" Bear picked up his coffee cup when Maggie came around. He waited until she was standing right next to him. He looked up at her and he asked his question exactly the way a man asks about coffee. "The girl in the back, she come in alone?" Maggie's hand tightened on the pot handle. "She did." Bear nodded once slowly. "SUV been out there since before we pulled in. Engine's been running the whole time." Bear took a sip of his coffee, set it down. His gray eyes were completely calm. "Okay," he said quietly. "You doing all right?" Maggie looked at him. "No," she said honestly. "I'm not." Bear nodded again. He turned slightly in his chair and said something to Dale in a voice too low to carry. Dale's eyebrows went up. He leaned in to the man next to him. Within 30 seconds, the entire table had gone quiet, and 6 men were suddenly very interested in their coffee cups, while their eyes made careful separate assessments of a parking lot across a highway. Maggie went back to Emily. "Honey," she said, settling back into the booth, How much do you know about what Victor is doing? I mean all of it. Not just you. Emily looked at her steadily. Everything, she said. I know everything. The girls, the farmhouse, the other places, who he pays, who he owns. A beat. I know enough to destroy him completely. That's why he wants me back. Maggie absorbed this. And your sister? You said Lily is there. You're sure? She was 3 days ago. That's the last time Emily's voice caught. She was in the back room. Victor knows she's important to me. He uses her. Her jaw set hard. She's 15 years old and he uses her to keep me in line. The fury that moved through Maggie Dawson in that moment was something she hadn't felt in years. Quiet, white, absolute. She stood up. I'll be right back, she said. She walked to the big round table in the center of the room. She stopped beside Bear's chair. She bent down slightly and spoke very quietly close to his ear, because what she was about to ask this man was not the kind of thing you said out loud in the middle of a room. Bear listened. He didn't interrupt. His face didn't change. When she was done, she straightened up. Bear set down his coffee cup. He turned and looked at Emily in the back booth, really looked at her, this time full and direct the way he hadn't allowed himself to before. And something in the big man's face shifted. Something that had been carefully, deliberately closed for a very long time. Because Bear Callahan had a daughter once, a girl with dark hair who loved horses and laughed too loud and drove him completely crazy. Her name was Sarah. She had disappeared 11 years ago from a parking lot in Dallas. The police had worked the case for 6 months. They had found her eventually. By then it was too late. He had spent 11 years living with that. He had spent 11 years thinking about all the moments when someone could have done something and didn't. All the ordinary people in ordinary places who might have noticed something, said something, done something, and looked away instead. He looked at this girl sitting alone in a corner booth, trembling like a leaf, eating her first real meal in days, while a predator sat outside in an idling car, waiting to take her back. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said to no one in particular, but to everyone at his table, "Nobody's going anywhere." The table went still. Dale looked at him. "Bear." I said nobody's going anywhere. He picked up his coffee cup again. His voice was completely level, completely certain. "Order whatever you want. We're going to be here a while." Dale looked at the window, looked back at Bear. Something passed between them, 30 years of friendship and shared history packed into 2 seconds. "All right then," Dale said. He picked up his menu, and outside the black SUV kept running. Bear stood up from the table 5 minutes later. He walked to the back booth unhurriedly, the way a very large man walks when he wants to seem unthreatening, which is a specific skill. He stopped at the edge of Emily's table and looked down at her. Emily looked up at him. Her whole body had gone rigid with instinctive alarm. A big man approaching her from across a room was not something she was equipped to experience calmly anymore. Her hands gripped the edge of the table. Bear saw this. He pulled out the opposite bench and sat down, put both hands flat on the table, visible empty. "My name's Jack," he said. "Most people call me Bear. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to do anything you don't want me to do. But I am going to sit here for a while if that's all right with you." Emily stared at him. "Why?" "Because I don't like the look of that car out there," Bear said simply. "And because Maggie is the best woman I know and she's scared. And because you look like you've been carrying something very heavy for a very long time by yourself." Emily didn't say anything. She looked at his hands on the table, big scarred, absolutely still. "You're not going to call the police," she said finally. It wasn't a question. "Not the local kind," Bear said. "Not until we know who we're calling." Emily's eyes widened slightly. "You understand." "I understand more than you might think," he said. He paused. The gray eyes were direct but not aggressive, just steady, the way old mountains are steady. "Maggie told me about your sister." Emily's breath caught. "I need you to tell me everything," Bear said. "Not for me, not so I can run off and play hero. Because there is someone I can call, someone federal, someone clean, someone who has been building a case and waiting for exactly what you know. But she needs to hear it from you." Emily looked at him for a long, measuring moment. Outside the SUV, engine purred on. "How do I know I can trust you?" she asked. Bear didn't answer right away. He was quiet for a moment. And then he said something he had not said out loud to a stranger in 11 years. Because I had a daughter, and someone like Victor Kane took her. And I was too late. His voice was even, steady, not performing grief, just stating a fact. The hardest kind of fact. I've spent 11 years being too late. I'm not going to be too late again. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Emily looked at this man, this big, silver-bearded, mountain-still man, and something happened in her eyes. The last wall came down. Not all the way, but enough. Her name is Lily, she said. She's 15, and I will tell you everything I know. Bear nodded. Then let's start, he said. And outside, without anyone noticing, Dale had moved his chair to face the front door, and two other bikers had quietly relocated to stools at the counter on either side of the entrance. And Maggie had picked up her phone. Emily Carter, for the first time in 8 months, was no longer alone. Emily's hands had stopped shaking. That was the first thing Bear noticed after she'd been talking for 20 minutes straight. She still looked like someone held together by the thinnest possible thread, but her voice had found a steadiness that hadn't been there before, like the act of saying the truth out loud to someone who was actually listening was doing something structural, rebuilding something inside her that had been deliberately broken down over 8 months. She talked, Bear listened, and Maggie stood close enough to hear without crowding her refilling coffee cups on automatic pilot while her mind processed every word Emily was saying. The picture that emerged was methodical and horrifying. Victor Kane wasn't a local criminal improvising his way through something. He was organized. He had properties. The farmhouse was the primary one in this region, but Emily had overheard enough to know there were others. He had people on payroll who wore badges. He had a system for moving girls when he sensed law enforcement pressure, which meant he had early warning systems inside law enforcement. He had been operating for at least 3 years in this area alone, and Emily believed he had operations in at least 2 other states. She knew names. She knew locations. She knew schedules. She knew this because Victor had stopped being careful around her about 6 months in. Not because he trusted her, Victor Kane didn't trust anyone, but because he had decided that she was completely and permanently broken, that she would never run, that she had nowhere to go and no one who would believe her even if she did. He had been wrong. The farmhouse, Bear said. You said Lily was there 3 days ago. How many other girls? Emily looked at her coffee cup. When I left this morning, 5, including Lily. A pause. There were 7 last week. I don't know where the other 2 went. The way she said it, the careful, clinical flatness of it, told Bear everything about what Emily had survived. She had learned to hold the most terrible information in the world at arm's length just to stay functional. Guards, Bear asked. 2 during the day, at least 3 at night. They rotate. She looked up at him. Victor doesn't stay there usually. He comes and goes. He has a house somewhere closer to the city. I never knew exactly where. He comes to the farmhouse maybe twice a week. Her jaw tightened. He came last night. Bear absorbed this without expression. So right now, this morning, he may or may not be at the farmhouse. He sent Danny to watch me, Emily said. Danny is in that SUV. He's not smart, but he doesn't need to be smart. He just has to keep me in his sight and call Victor if anything changes. Has he called Victor? I don't know, Emily admitted. Probably not yet. Victor doesn't like being disturbed over small things. Danny would have called if I'd run. I didn't run. I just walked into a diner. Her voice was precise, deliberate, like she had worked this out during the long walk to the diner step by step. Danny would be waiting to see if I come out. He's probably counting on me being too scared to do anything inside. Bear was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at her with those pale gray eyes and said, He knows you're scared. Yes. Good, Bear said. Let's use that. Emily blinked. What? People make mistakes when they think they already know what you're going to do. Bear leaned back slightly. You're not doing what he expects, and that's going to cost him time. Time is what we need right now. For a moment, just a moment, something crossed Emily's face that wasn't fear or grief or exhaustion. It was something that looked like it might eventually grow into something else if it was given enough room. Bear turned and looked over his shoulder. Dale was at the counter, apparently very interested in his pie. Bear gave him a look. Dale, without any visible signal being exchanged, slid his phone off the counter and walked casually toward the restrooms at the back of the diner. I'm going to make a call, Bear said to Emily. Not local, federal. There is an FBI agent. Her name is Rachel Monroe. She works trafficking cases specifically. I've known her for 4 years. He paused. She's been building a case against someone who operates in this region. I don't know if it's Victor, but I think it might be. Emily's breath caught. You know someone FBI? I know a lot of people, Bear said, not bragging, just stating a fact with the weariness of someone who had spent 50 years accumulating connections the hard way. Rachel Monroe is one of the good ones. She doesn't have ties to local law enforcement on this case. She operates out of a separate office, specifically to avoid the kind of corruption you're describing. Emily looked at him for a long moment. He could see her running calculations, weighing every variable. She had survived 8 months in a controlled environment by being extremely careful about trust. That instinct wasn't something you just turned off. If you call her, Emily said slowly, and Victor finds out, he won't find out from our end. Then he moves Lily. He moves all of them. He has protocols for this. He will scatter everyone and disappear, and then there won't be... Her voice broke off. She swallowed. Then there won't be anything for your FBI agent to find. I know, Bear said. That's why the call has to be careful and fast. And why what you know has to go directly to Rachel tonight, not filed through channels, not logged into systems where the wrong eyes can see it. Directly. Tonight. Emily stared at him. You've done this before. Bear's expression shifted barely perceptibly. Something like it. He didn't elaborate. She didn't push. The understanding passed between them without needing words. Okay, Emily said. Her voice was quiet, but it was solid. Make the call. Bear stood up. He looked at Maggie, who had been standing 2 feet away absorbing all of this. Maggie gave him a single nod. Bear walked toward the back of the diner, and outside the SUV sat still. And inside 5 girls nobody knew about, waited in a farmhouse somewhere while the clock moved forward without them. The weight of that was in every breath Emily took. Maggie slid into the seat Bear had vacated. She reached across and put her hand over Emily's again. Not saying anything, just being there. Sometimes that is the only thing in the world that helps. Emily looked at her. What if it's not enough, she whispered. What if we do everything right and it's still not enough? What if Lily? Hey, Maggie said firmly, stay here, right here with me in this moment. We handle what's in front of us. Emily pressed her lips together, nodded once. She was singing, Emily said suddenly. Maggie blinked. What? Lily. 3 days ago, late at night when it was quiet. Emily's eyes were distant. I could hear her through the wall. She still sings. She's been in that place for 6 weeks and she still sings. A pause, and when she continued, her voice had gone very soft. That's how I knew she wasn't completely gone. As long as Lily is still singing, she's still fighting. Maggie had to look at the ceiling for a moment. Then she's going to be okay, Maggie said. A girl who sings through that she's strong. Emily nodded. She's stronger than me, she said quietly. She always has been. Bear came back from the back of the diner 6 minutes later. He sat down. His expression was composed, but there was something different in his eyes, a slight sharpening and alertness that said the call had changed things. Rachel is on her way, he said. She'll come through the back. 1 hour, maybe less. Emily sat up straighter. She was already into the area. She's been running surveillance on a property 40 miles from here for the past 2 weeks. Bear looked at her steadily. Her target's name is Victor Kane. The silence that followed hit Emily like something physical. She had hoped, she had guessed, but hearing it confirmed hearing that someone somewhere had already been looking. Already had this man in their sights produced a reaction in her that she hadn't expected. Her eyes filled. She blinked rapidly, fighting it down. He doesn't know, she said. Victor doesn't know she's been watching. No, Bear said, and he's not going to know, not until it's too late for him to do anything about it. Emily exhaled, long and slow and shaking. Okay, she said, okay. She said it again quieter, like she was telling herself. Okay, I can do this. Dale appeared at the edge of the table. He looked at Bear, then at Emily, and his expression, which normally ran to gruff and impatient, had done something unexpected. It had gone soft around the edges. Dale had 3 granddaughters. He didn't say that out loud. He didn't need to. Anything we can do? Dale asked. Bear glanced at the window. Make sure nobody comes through that front door who shouldn't. Dale looked at the front of the diner, at the SUV, at the front door. He cracked his knuckles very quietly and went back to his stool at the counter. What happened next came without warning. Emily's whole body locked rigid. Her eyes went to the window and stayed there, and the color drained completely from her face in the span of about 2 seconds. Bear turned. There was a man crossing the highway. Not from the SUV. The SUV driver was still behind the wheel. This was someone else. Someone who had come from the other direction, parking out of the line of sight from inside the diner. Big, heavy set, wearing a dark jacket, moving toward the diner entrance with the unhurried confidence of someone who did not expect anyone to tell him no. "Is that one of Victor's?" Bear asked, his voice low and immediate. "That's Marcus," Emily said. Her voice had gone completely flat, not from calm, from shock. "He's Victor's. He does," she swallowed. "He handles problems. He coming in here to talk or coming in here for something else?" "He doesn't talk," Emily said. "Victor sends Marcus when he wants someone to stop being a problem." The next 6 seconds were very fast. Bear stood up from the booth without haste, the way only large men with a great deal of experience in dangerous situations can manage, completely unhurried in a way that is still somehow immediate. He didn't raise his voice. He turned and said at normal conversational volume, "Dale." Dale was already off his stool. Marcus pushed through the front door. He took 2 steps inside and stopped, because instead of the relatively empty diner he'd apparently expected, he was looking at 6 large men who had, all in the space of a few seconds, arranged themselves between him and the back of the room. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The whole diner had gone tense and silent, in the way that rooms do when something shifts from ordinary to dangerous, without anyone being able to point to the exact moment it happened. Marcus looked at the men in front of him. He looked past them toward the back booth. His face went through several calculations very quickly. Maggie stepped out from behind the counter. She stood with her arms crossed, blocking a sight line to Emily. "Can I help you?" she said. Her voice was perfectly pleasant. The most perfectly pleasant voice in the world, in the way that the voice of someone who is absolutely certain about where she stands is always perfectly pleasant. Marcus looked at her. He looked back at Bear. Bear stood in the center of the room with his hands at his sides. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His expression said everything it needed to say. It said there is a wall here. It says you are not getting past it. It said I have been standing between worse things than you and someone worth protecting. And I have done it in worse places than this. Marcus's jaw tightened. He looked at the booth in the back corner. He couldn't see Emily, Maggie, and Bear were blocking the angle. "I'm just looking for someone," Marcus said. "This is a diner," Maggie said. "If you want food, I'll take your order. If you're not eating, I'm going to have to ask you to step back outside. We're a little crowded today." Marcus looked around the room. At Dale. At the other bikers, each of them completely still and watching. At Maggie standing there with 30 years of complete ownership of her space. He made a calculation, and he decided the calculation did not favor him right now. "Sorry to bother you," he said. He turned around and walked back out the door. The bell above the door rang, and then he was gone. Nobody in the diner moved for 2 full seconds. Then Earl's voice came through the kitchen pass-through. "Maggie, I got an order up." And the room exhaled. Emily was pressing herself into the corner of the booth, both hands flat on the table, breathing in shallow and fast. Bear came back to the booth and sat down directly. "He's going to call Victor," Emily said immediately. "Yes," Bear said. "Victor will know something is wrong. He'll start moving things. He'll move Lily." "Emily?" Bear leaned forward, not aggressive, direct. "Look at me." She looked at him. "I need you to listen very carefully," he said. "In roughly 45 minutes, Rachel Monroe is going to walk through that back door. You are going to tell her everything you know. The farmhouse location, the layout, the number of guards, every name. You remember every detail. She has a team on standby. She has been waiting for something exactly like what you are about to give her." He paused, letting that land. "Marcus walking out of here right now means we have a window. Victor will try to find out what's happening before he panics. He'll send Marcus back to watch. He'll try to confirm how much exposure he has. That process takes time. Not a lot of time, but enough." Emily stared at him. "You're certain?" "I'm not certain of anything," Bear said honestly. "But I have spent my life dealing with men who think they're untouchable. They all have the same weakness. They can't believe that someone they've written off as nothing is actually the thing that's going to bring them down. He looked at her steadily. He wrote you off. That was his mistake. Emily held his gaze for a long moment, and then something settled in her, something that had been fragmentary and terrified and scattered, found a center point and clicked into place around it. Not certainty, she was not capable of certainty yet, not after 8 months of having certainty used as a weapon against her, but something close to it, something functional. I remember everything, she said quietly. He didn't think I was worth being careful around, so I remember all of it. Her voice was low and completely steady. Every room, every name, every routine, every code, every place he thinks nobody else knows about. Bear was quiet for a moment. Then Victor Kane, he said, is already done. He just doesn't know it yet. Outside, Marcus got back into the SUV, and a phone came out and a call was made to a man 40 miles away who believed completely and entirely that he was untouchable. He was wrong. And in the back booth of Maggie's Route 9 cafe, a girl who had survived 8 months of being told she was nothing, straightened her spine, wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, and started talking. She didn't stop for 37 minutes. And when the back door of the diner finally opened and a woman with sharp eyes and a federal badge walked in from the cold, Emily Carter was ready. Rachel Monroe was not what Emily had expected. She had expected someone polished, official, someone who would walk in with the full weight of a federal badge and immediately start issuing instructions, taking control, reorganizing the room around her authority. 8 months inside Victor Kane's operation had taught Emily that power always announced itself loudly, that the people in charge always needed you to know they were in charge. Rachel Monroe walked through the back door of Maggie's Route 9 cafe in a worn canvas jacket and jeans. No visible badge hair pulled back without ceremony, and the first thing she did was look at Emily. Not at Bear, not at Maggie, not around the room, and say quietly and directly, "You're safe right now. That's real. Hold on to that." Emily blinked. Her throat tightened. Rachel sat down across from her without being invited because she understood that waiting for an invitation from a trauma survivor is a way of making them do emotional labor they don't have the capacity for. She set her phone face down on the table and her hands flat beside it. "My name is Rachel Monroe. I've been building a case against Victor Kane for 11 weeks. She looked at Emily steadily. "You walked out of that farmhouse this morning with information I have been trying to get for 3 months. So before anything else, I need you to know that I believe you. Everything you've said, I believe all of it." Emily stared at her. Her jaw worked. "Everyone always says that first," Emily said carefully, "and then they start asking questions that make it clear they don't." Rachel nodded. "That's fair. And I'm going to ask questions that are hard, but I'm asking because I need operational details, not because I'm doubting you." She paused. "There's a difference between being questioned and being interrogated. I'm not here to interrogate you." Bear was standing a few feet away, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. He caught Rachel's eye over Emily's head. Something passed between them, a shorthand built from 4 years of occasional difficult collaboration. Rachel looked back at Emily. "Tell me about the farmhouse layout, specifically the back section, the rooms you mentioned to Bear." And Emily told her. She laid it out with a precision that clearly surprised Rachel, though Rachel was professional enough to keep most of that surprise off her face. Emily described the internal structure from memory, not visually but functionally. She described where sounds carried and where they didn't. She described the rotation schedule of the 2 daytime guards by their habits, not their names because she'd never been told their names. She described the single blind spot in the exterior camera coverage that she'd identified over months of careful observation. She described the back door lock that stuck in cold weather and had to be lifted while turning. She described Lily's room, its location relative to the back of the building, the fact that its window faced east. Rachel was writing fast. Her face had gone focused and sharp in a way that meant she was already building something, already mapping what Emily was giving her against what she already had. Then Emily said something that made Rachel's pen stop moving. "There's a man named Garrett," Emily said. "He drives a county sheriff's vehicle. He comes to the farmhouse every Wednesday evening. He stays for about an hour and he leaves with a bag that he didn't arrive with." Rachel looked up. "Garrett," she repeated. "I don't know his last name. I only ever heard his first name. But he wears a uniform, And he comes on Wednesdays, and Victor is always relaxed after he leaves, like someone who just paid an insurance premium. Rachel set her pen down very carefully. Emily, I need you to think carefully. The vehicle county sheriff, you're certain, not city police, not state police. County, Emily said without hesitation. There's a star emblem on the door. Gold star. I saw it from the window 3 times. Rachel picked up her phone. She typed something, set it back down. Okay, she said. Her voice was even, but something underneath it had shifted. Okay, that changes our entry approach. Bear pushed off from the wall. How so? Rachel looked at him. If we have a compromised officer in the county sheriff's department, then we cannot coordinate with local law enforcement on the raid, which means my team goes in alone. A pause. Which means I need to make calls right now to restructure an operation that was built assuming local backup. Bear absorbed this. How long does that take? Faster than you'd think when the alternative is letting Victor Kane know we're coming. Rachel was already picking up her phone. Give me 10 minutes. She stood up from the booth and moved toward the back of the diner phone to her ear, voice dropping below audibility. Emily watched her go. Then she looked at Bear. Is she good? She's the best I've ever seen at this, Bear said, and I've seen a few. Emily nodded. She looked down at the table. Her hands were still in her lap, and Bear noticed that they had started shaking again, not the fine tremor from hunger and exhaustion, but something different, something deeper. Hey, he said quietly. She looked up. You just handed her the whole case, Bear said. You know that, right? Everything you just told her, Garrett, the camera blind spot, the door lock, the schedule, that's not background information. That's how they get in without tipping Victor off. You just gave her the key. Emily's face did something complicated. I should have done it sooner, she said. I should have. No, Bear said, and his voice was firm enough to cut through the spiral she was starting to fall into. You did it now. Now is when it counts. She held his gaze, breathed, and that was the moment the front window of the diner exploded with light, not breaking the glass held. But a vehicle had pulled directly up to the front of the diner, headlights on full flooding, the front half of the room with white light at an angle that made everyone inside instinctively turn and squint. Dale was off his stool before the light even registered for most people. 2 other bikers were on their feet. The retired couple in the far booth grabbed each other's hands. Emily's whole body had gone rigid and white and completely still, the way an animal goes still when it has run out of places to run. That's not Danny, she said. Danny's car was across the street. She stopped. Her voice went very quiet. That's Victor. Bear turned and looked at the window. He could see the silhouette of a figure getting out of the vehicle unhurried, compose the particular movement of a man who has decided that he does not need to rush because everything will go the way he wants it to. Victor Kane was not what the name suggested. He was not large. He was not physically imposing. He was medium height, slim, wearing a jacket that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He had dark hair gone slightly gray at the temples and a face that from a distance looked almost pleasant. He was smiling. Emily made a sound, barely audible, like all the air had been pushed out of her at once. Bear put one hand flat on the table between them. Didn't touch her, just placed his hand there, solid and still, something for her eyes to anchor on. Look at me, he said. She couldn't. Her eyes were locked on the window. Emily. His voice was low and absolute. Look at me. She looked at him. He is not coming in here, Bear said. You understand, there are 6 of us between you and that door. There is a federal agent in the back of this building. You are not alone. He cannot take you out of this room. He doesn't need to take me, Emily whispered. He just needs me to walk out to him. Bear frowned slightly. Why would you do that? Because that's what he does, Emily said, and her voice had gone hollow in a way that was worse than crying would have been. He doesn't threaten. He doesn't shout. He looks at you, and something inside you that he's been building for months it does what he trained it to do. She swallowed hard. I know it's wrong. I know he can't actually make me, but my body doesn't know that. My body thinks if I don't go out there, something terrible is going to happen to someone I love. Bear was quiet for 1 second. Then he said, Lily. Emily's eyes filled. He's counting on that, Bear said. He's counting on you loving your sister more than you trust anything else, more than you trust yourself. More than you trust us. He built that in you on purpose. He leaned forward slightly. That's not a weakness. That's what he made out of something good. But it's not real power. It's borrowed. And it only works if you give it back to him. Emily stared at him. From the window, Victor Kane stood in the parking lot and waited with the patience of someone who had done this many times before. Maggie appeared at the side of the booth. She slid in beside Emily, not across but directly beside her, so that Emily was bracketed between the wall and another person's warmth. She didn't ask. She just sat down and put her arm around the girl's thin shoulders and held on. "You're not going anywhere," Maggie said, simply, completely. Emily's breath came out in a long, broken exhale, and she stayed seated. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. Harder than running that morning. Harder than walking into the diner. Harder than all of it. Because running required only her body, and walking in had required only her desperation. But staying seated while the man who had owned 8 months of her life stood 30 feet away and waited, that required something entirely different. That required choosing herself. Bear stood up from the booth slowly and walked toward the front of the diner. He stopped at the window. He looked through it directly at Victor Kane, and Victor Kane looked back at him. They regarded each other through the glass for a long moment. Victor's smile didn't change. He tilted his head slightly, a small gesture, almost polite, that said he was not intimidated, and he wanted Bear to know it. Bear crossed his arms. His expression said something back that didn't require any gesture at all. Dale appeared at Bear's shoulder, then 2 more of the bikers behind Dale, just standing there, just being a wall. Rachel Monroe came back from the rear of the diner at a fast walk. She took in the scene at the window immediately. She reached Bear in 4 strides and said quietly close to his ear, "Do not engage him. Do not go outside. Do not give him anything he can use." "I wasn't planning on going outside," Bear said. "Good." Rachel looked through the window at Victor. Her eyes went flat and professional. "That's him. That's actually him." A pause that lasted exactly 1 second. "My team is 40 minutes out. I need 40 minutes. "He's not going to wait 40 minutes, Bear said. "No," Rachel agreed. "He's going to make a move before that. He's here because Marcus reported something he couldn't interpret, and Victor doesn't tolerate uncertainty. He came to resolve it personally." She glanced back at Emily. "He's going to try to make contact. He's going to try to talk to her directly." "Over my dead body," Maggie said from the booth. Rachel almost smiled. Almost. "Mrs. Dawson, I need you to keep everyone calm and keep them inside. Can you do that?" "I've been doing that for 20 years, Maggie said. Victor Kane moved. He didn't come to the front door. He walked along the front of the building instead, unhurried toward the side. Marcus got out of the SUV and positioned himself near the front entrance. Victor disappeared around the corner. "He's going for the side door," one of the bikers said sharply. Rachel was already moving. "There's no side door on this building," she said, pulling out her badge and her weapon simultaneously as she went. "Stay with Emily." Bear turned to Dale. "Go with her." Dale went without a word. Emily was on her feet. She didn't remember standing up. She was just standing with Maggie's hand on her arm, and she was trembling again. All of it, the whole 8 months, pressing up through her skin all at once. "He's going to find another way in," Emily said. "He always finds another way. That's what he does. He finds the crack and he pushes until—" "Emily!" Bear's voice from across the room. Calm, direct, like a handhold on a sheer wall. "There is no crack. You hear me? Look around this room." She looked. 6 bikers, no 4 with Dale, and 1 other in the back with Rachel. But 4 men who had arranged themselves without anyone coordinating it into a pattern that covered every approach to the booth where Emily stood. Maggie beside her, Earl visible through the kitchen, passed through holding a phone and watching with grim readiness. The retired couple had moved their table back, and the old man had his hand on his wife's arm and was watching the room with a steadiness that suggested this was not the first difficult situation of his long life. Ordinary people, in an ordinary diner, making an extraordinary choice. A door banged at the back of the building. Emily spun toward the sound. Rachel's voice came through, clearly sharp and official. "Federal agents, stop right there." A crash, the sound of something hitting a wall. Then Victor Kane's voice, smooth, composed, almost conversational even now. "Agent Monroe, I've heard of you. I've been wondering when we'd finally meet." On the ground, Rachel said. Right now, hands where I can see them. I'm just looking for someone, Victor said. A young woman who I believe is a danger to herself. I'm concerned for her welfare. On the ground, Rachel repeated. This is the last time I'm going to say it. A pause that lasted about 3 seconds and felt like 30. Then the sound of movement. Victor's voice dropped too low to carry. Then Dale's voice. Do what she says, friend. Right now. Another pause. Then the particular sound of someone's knees hitting a floor. Emily's hand went over her mouth. Bear crossed the room in 5 strides and was at her side. It's okay, he said. It's okay, she's got him. Emily shook her head. No, she said. No, you don't understand. Victor has a lawyer on call 24 hours. He'll be out before the paperwork is finished. That's how he's done it before he's been arrested twice. And both times. Both times he didn't have you, Bear said. Both times there was no witness who knew everything. Both times the case against him was circumstantial. He looked at her steadily. This time is different. From the back of the diner, Rachel's voice, Dale, cuff him and keep him there. Don't let him use his phone. And then Rachel appeared in the doorway between the back and the front of the diner, slightly out of breath, badge-out eyes already on Emily across the room. He's secure, she said. My team is 35 minutes out. She paused. Emily, I need you to do something hard. Emily straightened. Every remaining piece of her pulled itself upright. What? I need you to go through the farmhouse layout one more time, all of it, from the beginning. Because we are not waiting for full backup on this. We are going in as soon as my team arrives, and every detail you give me in the next 30 minutes could be the difference between getting those girls out safe or... She stopped herself. Just give me everything. One more time. All of it. Emily looked at her, looked at Bear, looked at Maggie. She sat back down in the booth. Sit with me, she said to Maggie. Maggie sat. Emily put both hands flat on the table. She took one breath, and she started talking. In the back of the diner, Victor Kane sat on the floor with his wrists bound, saying nothing. His composed expression finally beginning to show. The first hairline cracks of a man realizing that the thing he had believed was impossible was actually happening. The girl he had written off had brought him down. She just didn't know it yet. Outside on the highway, the headlights of the first federal vehicle appeared in the distance, still 30 miles out and closing fast. And in a farmhouse somewhere in the dark countryside, behind a wall in a small locked room, a 15-year-old girl was still singing to herself. Quiet, steady, waiting without knowing she was being waited for. The federal vehicles arrived in 28 minutes. Rachel had said 35. She had underestimated her own team, which was something she would never admit out loud, but which clearly pleased her in a way she also would never admit out loud. Emily heard the convoy before she saw it, the low roll of engines cutting their sirens a half-mile out, the way Rachel had requested, because noise travels in flat Texas countryside and the farmhouse was only 11 miles away, and they were not going to announce themselves. Rachel came out of the back room where Victor had been secured under Dale's watch. She was on her phone coordinating in the clipped, precise shorthand of someone running a complex operation in real time. She made eye contact with Bear as she crossed the room and gave him a single nod that meant, we're moving. Bear looked at Emily. Emily was already standing. She had been sitting in that booth for 3 hours, and her body was exhausted in ways she couldn't fully inventory. But the moment she heard those engines, her spine went straight, and something shifted behind her eyes from survival mode into something more purposeful and clear. I need to go with them, she said. Rachel lowered her phone. Emily, I know that farmhouse better than anyone on your team. Emily's voice was steady, completely steady. I know which floorboards creak in the hallway outside the back rooms. I know which guard takes a bathroom break at the top of every hour. I know that the padlock on the back gate was replaced 2 weeks ago and the new one sticks on the left side and has to be jiggled before it opens. She looked at Rachel without flinching. You need me. Rachel looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Bear. Bear said nothing. It wasn't his call. He knew it. Rachel knew it. And they both knew that Emily knew it too, which was significant in itself. 8 months ago, this girl had been someone who didn't know she had the right to make her own calls about anything. You stay in the vehicle, Rachel said finally. You do not exit under any circumstances until I clear the building personally. You communicate through me. If you remember something you tell me, I relay it. Understood. Understood, Emily said. Bear, Rachel said, turning. We'll follow behind, Bear said. He didn't ask. He stated it the way people state facts. Rachel looked at him for exactly 1 second. Stay back until I give the all clear. I mean it. Your bikes don't go within a quarter mile until I call it. Agreed, Bear said. And he meant it, which Rachel could tell, which was why she accepted it. She turned back to her phone and started moving toward the back entrance, talking fast and quiet. Emily followed her, and Bear turned to his crew Dale and the 4 others who had been sitting in this diner for 3 hours over coffee that had long since gone cold, and he said very simply, saddle up. Nobody asked questions. Nobody made any commentary. They were on their rapport and moving in the time it took Bear to cross the room to Maggie. Maggie was standing behind the counter. She looked small suddenly, though Bear knew she wasn't. She looked the way people look when the action has moved past them and they're left standing in its wake. You going to be all right? Bear asked. Maggie looked at him. Her eyes were bright and her jaw was set hard. Victor's lawyer is going to arrive eventually and try to get him released, she said. What happens then? Federal hold, Bear said. Rachel booked him on federal charges the moment she cuffed him. His local connections can't touch that. He paused. The lawyer can come. Won't matter. Maggie exhaled. Go, she said. Go get that little girl. Bear put one large hand briefly on her shoulder. Then he walked out the front door of Maggie's Route 9 cafe into the cold night air, and the sound of 6 motorcycle engines turning over split the darkness like a rolling thunderclap. The black SUV sat abandoned and empty across the highway. Marcus was zip-tied in the back of a federal vehicle. Victor Kane was in the other one. The parking lot that had been silent and threatening for 3 hours was suddenly full of purpose and motion. And Emily Carter climbed into the back of Rachel's vehicle, pressed her hands flat on her knees, and did not look back. 11 miles. At the speed Rachel's driver was going, it was going to be about 9 minutes. 9 minutes to cover 11 miles in 8 months. Emily sat very still and closed her eyes and thought about Lily singing through a wall. She held that sound in her mind like a compass bearing. Rachel was in the front passenger seat still coordinating. Her team was a 6-person unit plus 3 additional agents she'd pulled in on short notice, and she was weaving together their approach with the precision of someone who had done this before and knew exactly how much could go wrong and was actively planning against every one of those things simultaneously. Emily, she said without turning, the blind spot in the camera coverage east side of the building, correct? Yes, between the main camera on the northeast corner and the one above the back door, there's about a 12-foot gap where nothing is covered. Emily kept her eyes closed. Talking from memory was easier that way. The camera above the back door also has a lag. Victor had it on a 30-second loop at one point. I don't know if he's updated it. We'll assume it's live, Rachel said. What about the guards' communication radios phones? Radios inside the house. Phones for contact with Victor. Emily paused. If Victor doesn't check in within a certain window, they have a protocol. I don't know exactly what it is, but there is one. Victor was very specific about that. He told one of the guards once that if communication went dark for more than 2 hours, they should assume compromise and initiate the protocol. Rachel checked her watch. Victor has been in federal custody for 41 minutes. That gives us roughly 79 minutes before the guards figure out something is wrong, assuming they haven't already tried to reach him. They reach out to him at midnight, Emily said. Required check-in every night at midnight. Rachel looked at her watch again. It's 11:14. 46 minutes, Emily said. Then we have a hard deadline. Rachel turned to her driver. Faster. The vehicle accelerated. Emily opened her eyes. She looked at the dark countryside moving past. Somewhere out there in the dark behind walls, she knew better than any place she'd ever lived, her sister was waiting in a room with no windows. 46 minutes. She pressed her hands harder against her knees and breathed. The convoy slowed and went dark 1/4 mile, out lights off, moving on parking lights only, which was enough to see the road, but not enough to send a visible beam across open countryside at distance. Rachel had 3 vehicles. She positioned them in a pattern Emily didn't fully understand, but which clearly had a logic to it. One to the east. One holding at the main road, the primary vehicle moving up the long dirt drive with its lights completely off. Emily stayed in the vehicle. She had said she would, and she meant it, and sitting absolutely still in the back of a dark federal vehicle, while trained agents moved on a building she knew intimately, but could not see from where she sat was the second hardest thing she'd done today, after staying seated when Victor stood outside Maggie's window. She could hear radio chatter low and controlled, code words she didn't know, status updates. Then a voice she did recognize, Rachel on the radio. East team hold at the corner. I have 2 guards or front in west positions. We wait for simultaneous approach. Emily counted in her head. Guard rotation. Top of the hour was bathroom break for the west position. She'd said so. She looked at the clock on the vehicle's dashboard. 11:22, 38 minutes to midnight check-in, 8 minutes to the top of the hour. She picked up the radio handset that Rachel had left on the back seat. She had told Emily it was there. She had also said very clearly, only use it if you remember something critical. Emily pressed the button. Agent Monroe. A pause, then Rachel's voice clipped, go ahead. The West Guard takes a bathroom break at the top of every hour. 11:23. He'll be inside for 3 to 4 minutes. That's your window on the west side. Silence on the radio for 2 seconds. Then copy that, 90 seconds. All teams stand by. Emily set the radio down. Her hands were completely steady. She looked at the dashboard clock. 11:22 and 40 seconds. She counted. At 11:23 and 10 seconds, the radio erupted with controlled rapid voice traffic that told her, without her being able to see any of it, that the operation had begun. She heard Rachel's voice once sharp, go, go, go. Then the radio went to short bursts of confirmation codes. Then silence. A silence that lasted 4 minutes and felt like 4 years. Emily sat in the vehicle and did not move and did not breathe and held Lily's voice in her mind and waited. The radio crackled. Rachel's voice. Building secure. All guards in custody. Beginning room by room. Emily's whole body started shaking. 4 individuals located in the east wing unharmed. A pause. Continuing to clear. 4. There had been 5 girls when Emily left, including Lily. Emily picked up the handset. That's 1 short, she said. Her voice came out completely level, which surprised even her. There should be 5. Rachel's voice came back immediately. Understood. We're still clearing. More silence. Longer this time. Emily watched the seconds move on the dashboard clock. 2 minutes. 2.5. Then Rachel's voice changed. It went from operational to something else. Something human. Just slightly. Just at the edges. Emily. She gripped the handset. Yes. We've cleared the main building. We have 4 individuals all safe. A pause that lasted exactly long enough to be significant. Lily is not in the main building. The world narrowed to a single point. What? Emily said. She's not here. We've cleared every room. The 4 girls we found, none of them are your sister. Emily was already reaching for the door handle. Emily, do not. She was out of the vehicle. She crossed the distance between the vehicle and the front arm of the farmhouse and the time it took her racing mind to process one single devastating thought. Victor had moved Lily before Emily ever escaped. Not after. Before. He had already known something was changing, or he had been cautious enough to remove his most valuable leverage before any risk presented itself. Bear had said it. She had said it herself. Victor used Lily to keep Emily in line. And a man like Victor Kane did not leave his most important tools in places that could be compromised. He had moved Lily somewhere else entirely. Rachel met her at the front entrance. Her expression was controlled, but her eyes were reading Emily with the focused attention of someone who needed her to hold together right now in this moment, because falling apart was going to cost Lily time. Listen to me, Rachel said, both hands on Emily's arms. Grounding, direct. She's not here. That is not the same as gone. Do you understand me? Victor is in our custody. His communication is cut. Nobody in his network can move her again without our knowledge. But I need you to think. Emily stared at her. Her chest felt like it had been hollowed out. I don't know where else. Yes, you do, Rachel said. Firm, not cruel, certain. You lived inside this operation for 8 months. You heard things he didn't think you'd remember. You said it yourself, he stopped being careful around you. So I need you to think about everything you heard, any location, any address, any name attached to a place, anything that felt off or out of context when you heard it. Emily shook her head. Her eyes were wet. There were so many. Not locations, Rachel said. Think about Lily specifically. Think about what he said about her. What did he say about her when he thought you weren't fully listening? Emily's breath came in short and fast. She pressed both hands against her face and pulled them down and made herself go still inside, made herself go back. 8 months of conversations she had heard through walls, through half-open doors, from the other end of rooms while she pretended to be absent from herself. Victor's voice, always measured, always precise, never wasted. The specific way he spoke about things he valued. And then it came. Not a location, a description. 3 months ago, early morning, Victor on the phone with someone she'd never seen. She had been in the kitchen, and he had been in the next room, and she had been very quiet and very still, and she had heard him say, "The property in the county doesn't have the capacity. Use the one off Miller Road. It's private enough, and the distance from the main route makes surveillance difficult." Miller Road. She had filed it away without knowing why. The brain does that, sometimes stores information in advance of understanding why it matters. "Miller Road to me," Emily said. "He mentioned a property off Miller Road. He said it was private. He said the distance from the main road made surveillance difficult." Rachel's eyes sharpened into something immediate and precise. She turned and was on her radio before Emily finished the sentence. "I need property records, any residential or agricultural property within 2 miles of Miller Road in this county. Now, and cross-reference, any property tied to Victor Kane's known aliases or shell company names." The response came back in under 3 minutes. One property, agricultural land, held under a company name that appeared nowhere in Rachel's existing case files, which meant Victor had kept it completely separate from his main operation, a backup location he'd never needed before tonight, 4 miles from the farmhouse. Rachel looked at Emily. "You did it?" she said. Simple, direct. Emily shook her head. "We haven't found her yet." "No," Rachel agreed, "but we're going to." She turned and started issuing instructions. The convoy reformed. 2 vehicles moving fast, no more time for caution because the midnight check-in window was now 19 minutes away. And when the guards at Miller Road got no response from Victor, they were going to initiate whatever protocol he had put in place, and Lily was going to disappear into a system that even Rachel Monroe's resources would struggle to penetrate. Bear appeared from around the side of the building. He had stayed back as agreed until the building was cleared. He took one look at Emily's face and understood immediately that something had gone wrong. "She's not here," Emily said. Bear's jaw tightened. "Where Miller Road property, Rachel's moving now." Bear looked at her for 1 second. She could see him processing it. The fear underneath his composure, the specific grief of a man who had been here before, who had driven toward a location where a girl was supposed to be and arrived to find a room that was empty. He would not arrive at an empty room again. "Get in the vehicle," he said to Emily. His voice was rough. "Get in and don't you dare give up." Emily looked at him. This man who had lost his daughter and was here anyway, who had sat across from her in a booth and put his hands flat on the table and refused to be anything less than a wall between her and everything Victor Kane had built. "I'm not giving up," she said. Bear held her gaze, nodded once. Emily got back in the vehicle. The convoy moved. 4 miles of dark road at speed that pushed everything to its limit. Rachel was on the phone and the radio simultaneously. Emily sat in the back with her eyes open and her hands in her lap and her mind completely focused on one single fact: Lily was still singing 3 days ago. Lily was still fighting. Lily was somewhere in this dark countryside, and she did not yet know that everything was about to change. 1 mile out, Rachel's radio crackled. One of her agents voiced tight. "Monroe, we have a problem. Lights just came on in the main structure. Repeat, lights on inside. Someone got a communication." Rachel's hand tightened on the radio. Source, unknown. Possibly a cell backup. Victor may have had an automated check-in system on a timer. "Time to breach. 2 minutes at current speed." "Oh." "Then we breach in 2 minutes," Rachel said. "All units, we are going in hot. Assume they know we're coming. Repeat, they know we're coming." Emily grabbed the headrest of the seat in front of her. "If they know, they have 2 minutes to decide whether to run or to hold," Rachel said. She turned and looked at Emily directly. "Every second they spend deciding is a second we're closing the distance." 1 minute out, the radio erupted again. An agent's voice, sharp and immediate. "Vehicle leaving the south side of the property, moving fast, heading east on the access road." "Rachel, cut it off. East team, cut it off now." Emily's heart hammered. Is Lily in that vehicle? Is she? We don't know yet, Rachel said. Honest, hard. Stay with me. The convoy hit the property at full speed. Doors opened before the vehicles fully stopped. Rachel was out and moving, and Emily was told to stay and stay. She did for 30 seconds, which was the longest 30 seconds of her life, and then the radio in the back seat crackled, and Rachel's voice came through with something different in it, something that made Emily go completely still. Emily, a pause. Emily, I need you to listen to my voice. Her hand went to the radio. Yes. We stopped the vehicle. Emily couldn't speak. There is a girl in the vehicle. She is conscious. She is physically unharmed. Another pause, just a breath long. Emily, I need you to tell me, does your sister have a small scar above her right eyebrow, about an inch long? Emily's vision blurred completely. She fell off her bike, she whispered. She was 9 years old and she fell off her bike, and I need a yes or no. Yes, Emily said. Yes. That's her. That's Lily. The sound that came through the radio then was not Rachel's voice. It was younger, rougher, scared, and exhausted, and alive. Emily. Emily Carter pressed the radio handset against her mouth with both hands and made a sound that was not any word in any language. It was something that lived below words. Something that had been locked up for 8 months in the exact same place where Lily had been locked up, and it came out all at once, completely uncontrolled, and it was the most human sound in the world. Lily, she said when she could say anything at all. Lily, I've got you. I've got you. I'm right here. Lily's voice on the radio, cracking and thin and absolutely unmistakably alive. I knew you'd come. I told myself you'd come. I kept singing so I wouldn't, so I could. And then Lily's voice broke too, and the radio just carried the sound of two sisters crying across 4 miles of dark Texas countryside. Bear was parked 20 meters back from the property line when his phone buzzed. It was a text from Dale, who was 30 feet to his left on his own bike. It said simply, "They got her." Bear read it twice. He sat on his motorcycle in the dark for a moment, engine idling, and he did something he had not done in 11 years, something private and quiet and complete. Then he took a breath, straightened, put his phone back in his jacket, and he waited for Emily to come back from those 4 miles because he wanted to be there when she did. The federal vehicles returned to the farmhouse property 20 minutes later. Emily was out of the lead vehicle before it stopped completely, and Rachel was only a step behind her, and when the door of the second vehicle opened and Lily Carter stepped out, 15 years old, pale and thin, and with eyes that had seen things no child should see, the distance between the sisters closed in less than a second. Emily caught her sister and held on with everything she had. Lily buried her face against her sister's shoulder and grabbed the back of Emily's hoodie with both fists, and they both went down to their knees in the dirt and just held on, not saying anything for a long moment, not needing to. The federal agents around them kept working, securing the scene, processing the individuals from the vehicle, documenting everything with the efficient professionalism of people who do this and know that the work doesn't stop for grief or relief or right or reunion. That was right. That was how it should be. But every single one of them took a moment, just a breath of a moment, to look at the two sisters in the dirt and then look somewhere else with the deliberate care of people choosing to give them what privacy they could. Bear sat on his motorcycle 30 feet away with his arms crossed and his chin down. Dale pulled up beside him, and they sat together without speaking. Two old men on loud bikes in the cold Texas night, watching the light moving in the farm windows and the figures moving purposefully in the dark. She got her, Dale said finally. She got her, Bear confirmed. His voice was even, completely even. Dale glanced at him sideways, said nothing more. Bear watched Emily hold her sister in the dirt and the cold, and something in him that had been a wound for 11 years didn't close exactly. Wounds like that don't close. But something around it settled, eased, like a knot that has been pulled so tight for so long that the loosening of it is almost its own kind of pain. Sarah, he thought, just once, just her name silently the way he thought it every day, just so she knew he was still here, still paying attention, still doing what he could with the time he had left. Then Emily looked up from where she was kneeling with Lily across the distance in the dark, and her eyes found Bear's. She didn't say anything. She couldn't from that distance. But she held his gaze for a moment, and the look on her face said everything that needed saying. Bear uncrossed his arms. He put both hands on the handlebars of his motorcycle. He gave her one single nod, small and slow and complete. And Emily Carter, who had walked into a diner 3 hours ago, trembling and hollow and alone, nodded back. Behind them both, on a highway that was now lit with blue and red federal lights stretching a quarter-mile in both directions, a case that had taken 11 weeks to build was finally definitively closed. And in the front seat of a federal vehicle 40 miles away, Victor Kane sat in silence with his hands cuffed in his lap and stared at the ceiling and understood for the first time in his carefully controlled life what it felt like to be completely and permanently out of moves. The girl he had written off had brought him to this. A girl who walked into a diner and whispered that she hadn't eaten in days. He never saw it coming. He should have known better than to stop believing she was worth being careful around. The paperwork started before the sun came up. That was the thing nobody told you about nights like this, the way the adrenaline burned off slowly and left behind something flat and exhausted and raw, and the world kept moving anyway. Federal agents processed scene documentation. Statements were taken. Phones were photographed and cataloged. A forensic team arrived at the farmhouse at 2 a.m. and began the methodical, necessary work of turning 8 months of Victor Kane's operation into evidence that would hold up in a federal courtroom. Emily gave her formal statement in the back of a federal vehicle with a recorder on the seat between her and Rachel, and Lily's hand locked inside hers the entire time. Lily had refused to let go since the moment they'd found each other in the dirt outside the Miller Road property. Emily hadn't asked her to. She spoke for 90 minutes, clear and precise and complete, and every name she gave, every location, every detail she had stored in the back of her mind during 8 months of being told she was nothing, it all came out organized and exact and damning. Rachel stopped the recorder twice, not because Emily needed to rest, but because what Emily was describing required Rachel to step outside and make immediate calls to coordinate arrests in 2 other states before the people she was naming could be warned. The second time Rachel stepped out, Lily looked at Emily and said quietly, "You remembered all of that?" Every word, Emily said. Lily was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know you were doing that. When you were there with me, I didn't know you were listening that hard." "I had to do something," Emily said simply. "I had to have something that was mine, something he didn't know about." She looked at her sister. "You sang. I listened." Lily's jaw trembled. She pressed her lips together hard. "I sang because I was scared that if I stopped, I'd forget what normal felt like." Emily tightened her grip on Lily's hand. "Did it work?" Lily thought about it seriously, the way 15-year-olds think about things when they're being honest. "Mostly," she said. "Some of it I'm going to need help getting back." "We'll get it back," Emily said. "Both of us. Together." It was the most straightforward promise Emily had ever made, and she meant it with every part of herself. Rachel came back. She sat down, looked at both of them, and said, 2 arrests in Oklahoma already confirmed, 1 more in New Mexico within the hour. The name you gave me, the county sheriff's deputy Garrett, he was picked up at his home 11 minutes ago." She paused. "Emily, what you gave us tonight didn't just save 5 girls. It is going to unravel an operation that has been running for 4 years across 3 states. I want you to understand the full weight of that." Emily looked at her steadily. "What happens to Victor? Federal trafficking charges, multiple counts. With what we have tonight, plus what my team has been building for 11 weeks, he is not walking out of a courtroom for the rest of his life." Rachel's voice was factual. Not triumphant. Rachel Monroe was not the kind of person who performed triumph, but certain, completely certain. "He is done." Emily absorbed this. She sat with it for a moment, the way you sit with something you've been waiting to hear for so long that the hearing of it takes time to become real. "Good," she said finally, and that was all she said about Victor Kane for a very long time. Outside, the sky was beginning to change at the edges. Not light yet, but the particular quality of dark that means light is thinking about it. Bear was still there. He had been there the entire time, parked back from the scene, with his crew out of the way of the federal operation, doing what he had said he would do, and nothing more or less. Dale had gone for coffee at some point, returning with a cardboard carrier full of cups from somewhere nobody asked where. The bikers stood around their motorcycles in the dark and drank bad coffee and didn't leave. When Rachel finally let Emily and Lily out of the vehicle, Emily walked directly to where Bear was standing. She still had Lily's hand. She stopped in front of him. Bear looked at Lily. Lily looked back at him with the careful measuring eyes of a girl who had spent 6 weeks learning that most large men were not safe. But she looked at him for a full 3 seconds, and something in her expression settled slightly. Children read people with a precision that adults have usually talked themselves out of, and what Lily read in Bear Callahan's face was what was actually there, a man who had been standing between her sister and danger all night, and who wanted absolutely nothing in return for it. "This is Bear," Emily said to Lily. "He sat across from me in a diner and didn't leave." Lily looked at him for another moment. Then she said, "Thank you." Bear's expression did something that he very quickly brought back under control. "You don't need to thank me," he said. His voice came out slightly rougher than usual. "I know I don't need to," Lily said. "I wanted to." Bear looked at this 15-year-old girl who had spent 6 weeks in a locked room singing to herself to keep from disappearing, and he thought about Sarah the way he always did, the way he always would, and this time the thought did not arrive alone. This time it arrived alongside something else, not replacement, not consolation, just company. The knowledge that the same man who had been too late once had been exactly on time tonight. "You got a strong sister," he said to Lily. Lily looked at Emily. "I know," she said. "I've always known that." Emily made a sound that was half laugh and half something else entirely, and she put her arm around Lily's shoulders, and Lily leaned into her. And Bear looked at the two of them standing there in the cold pre-dawn and felt something in his chest that he hadn't felt in 11 years ease open like a window. Dale appeared at his shoulder. "We heading out?" Bear looked at the scene around them. The federal vehicles, the agents moving with purpose and precision, the farmhouse with its lights blazing and its secrets finally irrevocably exposed. "Yeah," he said, "our work's done here." He looked at Emily one more time. "You're going to be all right," he said. Not a question, not exactly reassurance either. More like a statement of fact from someone who had assessed the available evidence and reached a conclusion. Emily looked at him. "So are you," she said. Bear held her gaze for a moment. He nodded once. Then he put on his helmet and got on his motorcycle, and the six of them rolled out into the pre-dawn dark the same way they'd arrived together, loud, taking up exactly as much space as they needed to. Emily watched their taillights until the road bent and took them away. Then she felt Lily shiver beside her, and she pulled her closer, and she said, "Let's get somewhere warm." The weeks that followed moved the way recovery moves, not in a straight line, not at a predictable speed, but forward. Always eventually forward. The case broke nationally within 48 hours of the arrests. Rachel had managed to hold the story for exactly as long as operationally necessary, and then the full weight of it came down in the press with the force of something that had been building for a long time. 4 years of operations, 3 states, dozens of victims, a network of corrupt local officials who had provided cover in exchange for money and silence. Victor Kane's face was on every news channel in the country within 3 days. His lawyer arrived at the federal detention facility and spent 4 hours with him and came out looking like a man who had just been asked to hold back the ocean with his hands. Emily was identified in coverage only as the key witness. Rachel had been absolute about protecting her identity during the investigation period, and Emily was grateful for it in ways she didn't have words for yet. She wasn't ready to be a name in a headline. She wasn't ready to be a symbol or a story that other people told. She was still in the process of becoming herself again, and that process needed privacy, the way a healing wound needs not to be handled. She and Lily were placed with a victim services coordinator named Donna, who was possibly the most practically capable human being Emily had ever met. Donna found them temporary housing, connected them with trauma-specialized therapists, navigated the bureaucratic complexity of their situation with a brisk efficiency that somehow never felt cold, and appeared at their door with groceries twice a week without being asked. On the 3rd week, Emily went to see Donna alone. She sat across from her in the small office and said, "I want to know what it takes to do what you do, to work with people in situations like ours." Donna looked at her for a long moment. "Why?" "Because I know things now that I didn't know before," Emily said carefully, "about how it works, about what the people inside it experience, about what actually helps and what just looks like helping." She paused. "I don't want that knowledge to just live inside me and go nowhere." Donna was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "It's a long road. It requires a lot of training. And it requires you to take care of your own healing first. You can't pour from an empty cup, and anyone who tells you otherwise is going to burn you out inside 18 months. I know, Emily said. I'm not talking about next month. I'm talking about eventually. Donna studied her. You're 19 years old, she said. Yes, Emily said simply. Donna looked at her for another moment, and then she opened her desk drawer and pulled out a pamphlet from a university social work program. She slid it across the desk. Start here, she said. Emily picked it up, looked at it, folded it carefully, and put it in her pocket. It was the first plan she had made for a future in 8 months. It felt like learning to use a muscle that had been still for too long, slightly painful, slightly unfamiliar, and undeniably unmistakably real. The call from Maggie came on a Tuesday morning 5 weeks after the night at the diner. It was short and characteristic of Maggie, which meant it contained no unnecessary words. I'm making pancakes Saturday morning, Maggie said. I want you both here. Emily smiled at the wall. We'll be there, she said. She didn't tell Lily until Friday evening because she wanted to watch her sister's face when she heard it. Lily had been doing well, better than Emily had dared to let herself hope, though the therapist had said clearly that the visible okayness of teenagers in recovery was not a complete picture and they would need to stay attentive for a long time. Lily had good days and hard nights. She slept with the light on. She startled easily. She was still in there, still fighting, still singing, sometimes in the mornings, when she thought no one could hear. And Emily always could hear and always would and never said anything, because some things are more important when they're private. When Emily told her about Maggie's on Saturday, Lily looked up from the book she'd been reading and said, The diner, the one where you, yes, Emily said. Lily thought about this. Will Bear be there? I think so, Emily said. I didn't ask, but I think so. Lily nodded slowly. Okay, she said. And then after a moment, I want to thank Maggie properly. Not just I want her to know that I know what she did. She'll say she didn't do anything, Emily said. She'll say she just made breakfast. Lily smiled slightly. Then I'll tell her that breakfast was everything. Saturday morning arrived clear and cold and bright, in the particular way that November mornings arrive in Texas when they're being their best selves. Emily and Lily walked into Maggie's Route 9 cafe at 9:15 in the morning, and the bell above the door rang the same way it always had, the same small, ordinary sound it had made when Emily pushed it open 5 weeks ago, with trembling hands and nowhere left to go. Maggie looked up from the counter. She took in the two of them standing there in the doorway. Emily still thin but with color back in her face, Lily small and watchful beside her, and her expression did exactly what Emily had known it would do. It went through every emotion it needed to go through in about 2 seconds, and then it settled into something warm and practical and completely Maggie. Booth in the back, Maggie said. I already said it. Emily laughed. It came out easier than she expected. Of course you did. They slid into the back booth, not the farthest corner this time, but the 1-2 booths forward, the one with better light. Close enough to the window to see out, far enough back to feel settled. Emily sat with her back not against the wall, which was new, and noticed that she'd done it and didn't move to correct it. Small things, everyday small things. Bear was already there at the large round table in the center of the room with Dale and 3 of the others in the middle of what sounded like an argument about whether Dale had actually been to New Mexico or had only claimed to have been to New Mexico. The argument stopped when Bear saw Emily and Lily come in. He raised his coffee cup. That was all. No words, no gesture beyond that one small lift of a mug, but it said everything it needed to say, and Emily understood every word of it. Lily slid out of the booth before Emily could say anything and walked directly to the round table and stood in front of Bear. Bear set down his coffee cup. He looked at her. I heard you helped keep my sister safe, Lily said. While I couldn't. Bear looked at this girl steadily. Your sister kept herself safe, he said. She did that long before any of us showed up. We just made sure nobody got in her way. Lily considered this. She said the same thing about me, she said, that I kept myself safe by singing. She was right, Bear said. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then, my sister said you lost someone, a daughter. The table had gone quiet. Dale was looking at his pie. Bear met Lily's eyes. I did, he said. I'm sorry, Lily said. Simply directly the way 15-year-olds say things when they mean them without the complicated overlay of adult self-consciousness. I'm really sorry. She should still be here. Bear's jaw moved. He was quiet for one beat. 2. Yes, he said. She should. Lily nodded. She looked like she was going to say something else and then changed her mind in the way of someone who understood that some things don't need more words. She went back to the booth. Earl came out of the kitchen with a plate of pancakes that he set on the table without ceremony, because Earl did everything without ceremony, and then he went back to the kitchen without saying anything, which Emily recognized as his way of saying everything. Maggie brought coffee. She sat down across from them for exactly 4 minutes. She always knew how long she could leave the counter unattended, and in those 4 minutes she said nothing about what had happened, and everything about what she was going to make them eat, and how Lily needed more color in her face, and how Emily needed to come back next week so Maggie could teach her how to make the hash brown recipe that Earl refused to write down. When Maggie got up and went back to the counter, Lily watched her go. She acts like nothing happened, Lily said quietly. No, Emily said. She acts like what happened isn't the only thing we are. She picked up her coffee cup. There's a difference. Lily looked at her sister. Something moved across her face, recognition maybe, or the beginning of it. Yeah, she said slowly. Yeah, there is. They ate their pancakes. The diner filled up around them the way diners fill up on Saturday mornings. Families regulars, a table of older men who apparently had an ongoing dispute about local politics that had been running since 1987. Normal life proceeding at its normal pace, completely indifferent to the catastrophic and the extraordinary in the way that normal life always is, which is not a cruelty, but a kind of mercy. Bear was telling Dale a story that made Dale snort coffee. 2 of the other bikers were looking at something on a phone. The retired couple from 5 weeks ago, the one who had moved their table back during the confrontation with Marcus, was in their usual spot, the old man holding his wife's hand on top of the table. The way people do when holding hands has become so habitual, they do it without noticing. Lily ate half her pancakes. Then she put down her fork and looked out the window at the highway. Her expression was complicated in a way that Emily recognized the particular look of someone thinking about before and after and all the space between. Are you okay? Emily asked. Lily was quiet for a moment. I will be, she said. Emily nodded. Yeah, she said. Me too. Not I am okay. Not we're fine. Not the automatic hollow response that Emily had given to a waitress in this same building 5 weeks ago, when okay had been a wall she hid behind because the alternative was too much to carry in a stranger's diner. I will be. Me too. The truth. Honest and forward-facing and full of the kind of hard, specific hope that doesn't come easy, but lasts. From across the room, without looking up from his coffee, Bear smiled. Just slightly. Just enough. And Lily Carter, 15 years old, 6 weeks out of the darkest place she had ever been, looked at the table and at her sister, and at the pancakes, and at the ordinary Saturday morning light coming through the window of a roadside diner in Texas, and she laughed. Not loudly, not because everything was okay, but because she was still here and her sister was still here, and the pancakes were genuinely very good, and sometimes that is enough to laugh about. The sound moved through the diner the way laughter moves through a room when it's real lightly, without asking permission, touching every person in the space, and reminding them briefly and completely that they were alive. Maggie heard it from behind the counter and did not look up because she was Maggie and she did not make a production of things. But she was smiling when she turned back to the coffee pot. Some things begin as disasters and become against all reasonable odds exactly what they were supposed to be. Emily Carter walked into a diner on a cold afternoon with nothing left and nowhere to go and whispered to a stranger that she hadn't eaten in days. And a waitress paid for breakfast. And 6 bikers refused to leave. And a veteran who had already lost everything chose not to lose again. And a federal agent had been quietly building toward this night for 11 weeks. And a 15-year-old girl kept singing through a wall. None of them were extraordinary separately. None of them had powers or resources beyond what ordinary human beings possess. They just looked at a person who needed help and made a choice, one small, specific, irreversible choice, not to look away. That is the whole story. That is the only story that matters. Evil survives in the spaces between people who almost acted. And it ends when enough ordinary people in enough ordinary places choose to close those spaces entirely. Maggie's Route 9 Cafe closed those spaces on a cold Tuesday afternoon in November, and two sisters who almost disappeared from the world entirely sat in a booth together on a Saturday morning and ate pancakes and laughed, and the sun came through the window exactly the way it always had, indifferent and warm and completely ordinary. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.